Welcome to Lecture 3, the lecture that never seems to end on the theory of reasoned action and the theory of planned behavior. As I say, this is part 3 of what will probably be about 5 parts. Now is what it looks like. We're still in the theory of reasoned action, which is about attitudes and subjective norms. In part 2, I talked about attitudes, so now I'm going to talk about subjective norms. Subjective norms, as you recall, has to do with the social support that you feel. And we can't just say or ask a person, what would your mother think of this, right? What do your friends think? What does your professor think? What does your preacher, rabbi, whoever you think? I mean, we can ask those questions. We do usually ask those questions, although we choose people often relevant to the actual behavior we're looking at. We'll do that, but then we also have to ask, and do you care about their opinion on this? Because I think we all know sometimes there's somebody we know who really thinks we should do something or really thinks we shouldn't do something. But on this particular issue, this friend, this parent, this mentor, this boss, this professor, their opinion doesn't hold much water with you. Subjective norms are made up of normative beliefs, and that includes the reference. But there's a T, there's not a reference, but a reference. And those are the people. That would be, again, the mentor, the professor, the boss, the best friend, the physician, right? Those are the reference. And their normative belief, right? My blank would think it's good, my blank would think it's bad. We get a positive 3 to a negative 3. And I'll say just right now, the subjective norm lecture is going to go a little bit faster than the attitude lecture because it follows that same sort of rhythm with the scales and so forth. Right? You might care a lot about their opinion, which is a 7, or not at all, which is a 0. And here, much like with attitude, the normative belief is multiplied by the motivation to comply, and that gives us our subjective norm component. Again, component because there's different, we'll look at different reference. Right? And so if we're looking at any behavior, there's a number of different reference that will be appropriate to that. In a study I published, it had to do with people orally citing their sources in a speech. So the relevant reference there had to do with the professor of my class, or the teacher of my class, my classmates, and then the third one we used in the study my colleague and I did, or colleagues I should say and I did, was a friend hearing me practice my speech, right? The idea of being somebody not in your class. Those were all relevant to the discussion of something with a behavior in your public speaking class. But a physician probably wouldn't go on there. Your physician probably doesn't have much of an opinion about it, or at least not an opinion that seems terribly relevant here. Likewise, your mommy or your daddy says, may not mean a whole lot to you on this particular matter, but you may be more motivated to comply, perhaps, according to what your teacher says, what your classmates think, right? I think sometimes in class, we know our instructor, our professor, or teacher would really like us to answer the question, but we're afraid of what our classmates will think, so then we don't. Right? So there's that motivation to comply. It's going to vary according to the context. This all means that if we have a behavior that a person, a referent, thinks is bad, and you really care about what they think, well, that's going to have a very strong effect. So here we'd have a negative 3 times a 7. That would end up being a negative 21. That would strongly deter you from the behavior, whatever that behavior was and whoever that referent was. But again, if let's say instead you don't really care much about their opinion, so your physician tells you, you really need to cut out the fatty foods, Wesley. Oddly specific, right? Okay, I haven't been told that yet, exactly. If I didn't care about my internist's opinion, which unfortunately I do, but if I didn't care, that negative 3 times 1 would only equal a negative 3. So their very firm opinion against a behavior is not going to have much impact. Right? So it's always going to be about who is the person, what's their opinion, but also, do I care about their opinion? Right? You don't know me? Okay. So again, the sum of the subjective norms is the total score for subjective norms. As we look at some other examples, much like I did with attitude, look at some other examples. And these, by the way, are parallel to the attitude examples if you want to look at them. Normative belief around the use of condoms, a relevant referent here might be my partner, like my sexual partner, right? My partner would strongly disapprove or strongly approve of using a condom. Okay, now we're going to ask, how much of a deal breaker is that for you? Because we know in some relationships, people, if their partner does not like the use of condoms, they're much less likely to use condoms. And in other relationships, they're just much less likely to have sex with that person, right? So again, it's about how do you, what does the other person, your referent, what do they think of it? And then how much do you care about that? So in this case, it's a person with a partner who really doesn't like condoms, right? They strongly disapprove, or at least decently so. I'll give them a -2. But the person says, yeah, I don't really care much about what you think because either we use a condom or we're not doing this. That's a -4. So that's not strongly supporting condom use, but it's not taking away from it very much. It's nothing like a -21, right? And of course, what we prefer to see is that having a partner who's all about it, right? That would be good. But also, even if the partner was all about it up here at the 3, if that was multiplied by a 1, where you don't care much about your partner's opinion, you're going to use them either way, you don't really care, it's a 4. What am I saying? 1 times 3 is 3. It just means that that partner's opinion is not supportive of your decision. But again, we look at the whole thing, and maybe there are other factors that are supportive of it. Because it may be for you, it's more about the outcomes than about the subjective norms that influence your behavior. But that's the thing we'll get into in a little bit. As I go back to looking at the recycling example, right, my friend's opinion of recycling is whatever, right? They strongly approve, they strongly disapprove. And then how much do I care about their opinion? Do they think I'm a bad person about recycle? Do they think that I'm dumb if I do recycle? Right? We can see then how that's going to end up working out. Let's go back again to the example of texting and driving. As I said, I'm using these parallel examples, so if you want to go back to the lectures and compare what I've done for the attitudes and subjective norms, you can compare step by step these examples. And here it has been condom use, recycling, and now again, texting and driving. And so with texting and driving, the reference I used here was your mom, and you may not have a mother, you may not like your mother. I mean, those are relevant questions that actually will come up here, right? But I said your mom, a friend, and your professor. These aren't totally relevant, but that's what I'm using here just as a starting point. And so what do they think of it? Well, your mama thinks it's really pretty bad to do. And your friend thinks, it is cool, man. And your professor says, what are you, a moron? Right? So -2, +2, and a -3. What's your motivation to comply? How much do you care? Well, this person, they love their mama, right? Their mother's opinion matters a lot to them. So on a scale from 1 to 7, it's a +6. They care about their friend's opinion pretty well. It's a 4 out of 7, which is just sort of right there in the middle. And their opinion of their professor is not much. Or their motivation to comply with their professor thinks doesn't, because it's on a 1 to 7, it just doesn't mean a whole lot to them. That means the products we end up here with are, for the mom, a -12, for the friend, a +8, and for the professor, a -6. And when you add all those up, you end up with a product of -10. As I talked about before, all these numbers are relative. That -12 is only relative to out of what. And so if we say it's all on a scale from a -21 to a +21, right? And then all those added up there, those columns added up means that out of a total of -63 to +63, we see that overall, the mom, a -12 and a -21, that's pretty decent. It's better than the halfway there toward a complete negative, but the mother's opinion is having a bit of an impact there. The friend's opinion is mostly, but not entirely, canceling out the mom's opinion. And the professor's opinion is sort of weakly backing up the mom. Overall, it's a -10. A -10 out of a possible -63. It could be worse, it could be a +10, but obviously a -40 would be a whole lot better. What we take away from this is that the subjective norms in this case probably aren't doing a whole lot to influence the individual's decision about whether to text and drive. With those individual numbers on subjective norms, what can you do? Well, it's much the same story for the attitudes. We're going to identify areas for change. So in terms of normative belief, right, my friends, blank, texting and driving, strongly approve, strongly disapprove. And then if we look at the motivation to comply, my friend's approval of texting and driving is, a 4 out of 7 in terms of importance to me. Well, one thing we could do, of course, looking at that, is we could change the perception you have of the reference opinion. You think your friends give texting and driving, just as an example, or a person thinks their friends give texting and driving out of a possible -3 to +3, a 2, right, which is a pretty strong evaluation of texting and driving. What if you're wrong? We'll talk about this later when we get to the spiral of silence. But, we often misguess what other people think. So a thing we might do in terms of persuasion is try to change people's perception of others' actual opinion. A few years ago, I noticed in the stairwells of one of the buildings here at the university, there was a sign up and it said, I can't remember what the number was, but it was something like only 30% of students this weekend will have more than 2 drinks or something like that. That's sort of just random fact. Okay, and how many of them are left-handed, right? I mean, no. The point is, it was trying to create a norm that was resisting binge drinking. I mean, and I can't remember what it said anymore, but 2 drinks in a weekend is clearly not binge drinking. But the point was, it was saying most of the people on this the students on this campus aren't going to have much to drink this weekend, right? Most of them probably aren't even going to have 2 drinks. So what it's trying to do is change what is your perception of what other people do. So if you're feeling like going on a bit of a binge this weekend, drinking alcohol is something that's supported by everybody here on campus, all my other college peers, that message was meant to let you know, hey, FYI, most people aren't even hardly having 2. All right. So one thing we can do is actually change the reference opinion, right? You think, well, everybody does it. But what if we let you know that everybody doesn't do it? And also we can change your concern for their opinion. Right? We can get you to care more or care less. And so we might get you to care less about what your friends think about whether you text and drive. We might discourage you from that. We may encourage you to listen to the people who are older and wiser in your life, the people who, like in this example, your mother, who in this case really frowns on it. Maybe we encourage you to listen to the people who are older and wiser, and they've made it this far for a reason. They made some better choices. Put more stock in their opinion, right? So that's something we might do. And also, by the way, we might actually add a whole other referent. We might say you've made this decision about, say, texting and driving based on the opinion of these people. Maybe we can get you to care about somebody else's opinion who we know is very much against it. And as before, all of this may be moot in final analysis because it may be that subjective norms doesn't have as much of an impact as something else, and that's where we want to focus instead. Okay. Right, so that's the second part of the theory of reasoned action. But wait, I'm not quite done. So the theory of reasoned action, in sum, says that there is the attitude toward behavior and the subjective norm, and those together create, remember, not actually behavior, but our behavioral intention, or just intention, behavioral intention, and that itself is predictive of behavior. And so that's the theory of reasoned action. And what gets exciting in the next lecture is when we turn the theory of reasoned action into the theory of planned behavior by adding a third element.